Hello, everyone. It's just 2 minutes after the hour, so we'll go ahead and begin. Thanks for joining our end of year MS Activist webinar. And what a year it has been. We can't wait to talk to everyone about the successes and victories we've had this year and celebrate together. As an introduction, I'll be the moderator of today's call, and my name is Laura Bennett. Many of you know me by LB. I'm our director of grassroots advocacy here at the MS Society, and I go by she, her pronouns. I've been with the MS Society for 10 years, and when I'm not working in advocacy, I co-captain one of the largest bike MS teams in the greater DC market area. Bike MS is what first connected me to the MS Society more than a decade ago, but the passion of MS activists like the ones we have here today is what keeps me fueled to drive change. So thank you for joining me. Our agenda for today, we have quite a few exciting things to cover, and I want to make sure that we can preview it and set the tone for the call and our many exciting speakers. After I share our mission and idea statement, we'll jump into a discussion with MS activists about our 2023 and 2024 wins at both the federal level and the state level, where we'll get to celebrate and share how the voices of many MS activists have been heard over the last couple of years. Then we'll send everyone into breakout rooms. We've gotten feedback from MS activists through these webinars that you'd like more time to talk to one another. So we're hoping that these facilitated smaller breakout rooms will help us do that. We hope that you can meet new MS activists from across the country and hopefully connect with some old friends if you've been to these before. The breakout groups will last between 12 and 15 minutes. So more details on what's to come and what you need to do and how that'll work. But like magic, everyone will be transported into a breakout room. We'll also be sharing information about what we can do during the Congressional Lame Duck that we're in right now, as well as how we can help prepare for 2025 and beyond. To kick things off, I invite everyone to join us in the chat and share your name and where you're coming from so we can start to get to know each other. But first, I'll run through some technology and logistics. This session is being recorded and it will be shared on the Society's YouTube channel and through our activist network email after the call and tomorrow. Everyone is currently on mute. When we go into breakout sessions, please feel free to unmute and come up on camera for the breakout sessions to get to know each other. The National MS Society's mission statement: we will cure MS while empowering people affected by MS to live their best lives. And new here is the Society's commitment to our idea statement, or inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We will amplify the voices of all people affected by MS and celebrate our differences in the drive to end MS. We affirm the space for everyone to express their perspectives, fueling our vision with innovative ideas and insight. We commit to advancing inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility within our workforce and across the MS movement. So kicking us off, I'd like to give an overview on what we've seen over the last 2 years across the country. Sometimes when we do advocacy work, we can get lost in the weeds. So the high level overview can help us see all the reasons we should celebrate. We often think about the 1 or 2 bills that we worked on individually in our states, and we want to paint a picture and help highlight the success across the country and what those 1 or 2 bills are helping contribute to and accumulate across the country. Our goal here is to show you how vast our advocacy work is together, both at the state level and the federal level. So whether you worked on a bill that was passed or whether you're brand new to advocacy and this is the first time you're hearing from us, we want to celebrate you and we want to celebrate each of those steps respectively. So again, to kick things off, here you'll see both 2023 and 2024 highlighted. In 2023, the MS Society took a position on 160 different bills at the state level. MS Society staff and activists delivered testimony on those bills 217 times. And as a result, 42 of those bills passed. This year in 2024, we took position on 133 bills. And MS Society staff and activists delivered testimony 239 times, with 44 bills passing this year alone. So let me pause there for a minute. That is a huge accomplishment, and I hope you see yourself reflected here. Whether you're one of the MS activists who help us testify more than 450 times over the last 2 years alone, whether you sent an action alert and added your voice to those bills as they were moving through their House or their Senate, I hope you see yourself reflected in this work. And remember, the bills that are passed are important, but so are the ones that we worked on and maybe didn't pass. They helped lay the foundation for future legislation that we'll be able to work on in 2025 and beyond. They helped educate elected officials, and they raise awareness about important issues people living with MS and their loved ones are impacted by. At the federal level, we've seen a great deal of success as well, thanks to you, our MS activists. In 2024 alone, we had over 8,000 activists send over 30,000 communications to legislators. Together, we held over 360 meetings with members of Congress this year through our public policy conference and August recess visits. And all of these things combined helped amplify the voices of people living with MS across multiple media channels and throughout the halls of Congress. In May of 2024, President Biden signed into law the Securing Growth and Robust Leadership in American Aviation Act. This was the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Bill, which we worked tirelessly on and included air travel accessibility components, which we're going to hear about a little bit later on our upcoming panel. MS activists and society staff advocated for these provisions over the course of 2 years to improve safety and accessibility. And they included things like new training requirements for assisting passengers with limited mobility and proper stowing of assistive devices to prevent damage. MS activists played a pivotal role in raising awareness about this need through both online stories and as part of our 2024 public policy conference that took place last March. Since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, we've seen multiple provisions start being addressed, and we're poised to see some really big changes in 2025. In addition to this work, for the very first time, we were able to see the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services cover seat elevation devices in power wheelchairs for Medicare beneficiaries. This is a big win, and the MS Society provided the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services with the evidence on the medical necessity of these devices, particularly in safety and to assist with transfer between different surfaces. Now down to the funding request. And these are some really big numbers here, so it's exciting to be able to share. And one thing I want to highlight is the increases are great, but so is flat funding. That means these programs were able to continue on, and that's always what we want to see. So for fiscal year 2023, Congress passed funding that included $3 billion in increases for the National Institutes of Health, which we jointly advocate for alongside other health advocacy organizations. We also saw flat funding or level funding for the MS research program at the Department of Defense to the tune of $20 million. Again, that level funding is equally important. It allows us to continue that work. In 2023, we also saw a $2 million increase to the Veterans Affairs MS Centers of Excellence. And we're really excited about that and look to continue that work in the future. In 2024, Congress passed funding in March of 2024 this year. I know it can get a little bit confusing, but we were able to secure a $300 million increase for funding at the National Institutes of Health, which focuses on that basic science research that gets out into the communities and institutions that are studying MS, among other things. We once again saw level funding for the MS research program at the Department of Defense, again, a big win. And it's been great to see those increases over the year to get us to this point since 2008. And the VA MS Centers of Excellence saw flat funding this year. Again, anything that's not a decrease is always a win. In addition, we saw level funding for things like the Centers for Disease Control, National Neurologic Conditions Surveillance System, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, all of which impact people living with MS. We're currently working with Congress on fiscal year 2025 funding, and there are some important deadlines coming up that we'll talk about a little bit later. But for now, I think the best way for us to learn about these wins is to update all of us and invite a couple of the individuals who are part of that progress up to talk. So we're going to have three different mini panels, if you will, of activists join us. So first up, I've got, sorry, something going on with audio there. First up, I've got Bryant Robinson, the MS Society's Senior Manager of Government Relations, here to join me, as well as Jennifer Digman, who is joining us as an MS activist from Michigan. Bryant, I'll kick things off with you. You worked heavily on FAA reauthorization and air travel accessibility. Can you tell us about some of these exciting wins we've had this year?
Of course. So, as you already stated, in May, Congress passed the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act. Now, the FAA is reauthorized every 5 years, and historically, disability groups, which include the MS community, uses reauthorization as an opportunity to ask Congress to make air travel more accessible for people with disabilities. Now, due to the advocacy efforts of MS activists over the past 2 years, several disability-related provisions were included in the final FAA reauthorization legislation. This included training requirements for assisting passengers with limited mobility, additional requirements for properly stowing assistive devices, improving the Department of Transportation's complaint process, better access and accessibility standards of in-flight entertainment, as well as improved access to airline websites and applications, increased access to seating accommodations, a continued study into the safe and secure in-cabin wheelchair tie-down systems, and a in-depth analysis of airline-reported mishandled wheelchair data.
Thank you, Bryant. So very comprehensive. Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit more about what your experience has been like and how this has impacted you in the past?
Well, I did not fly for probably the first 10 years after my diagnosis. I was scared to do it and I was worried because my wheelchair, I'm no longer able to walk. My wheelchair is my legs. And to give that up, because in case people don't know, for me to ride or to fly on an airplane, I have to get out of my wheelchair and someone whisks it away into the body of the plane. And so for that 2 hours that I'm on the flight, because people with disabilities know we're the first on the plane and we're the last off, just to have that transportation gone away is a little scary. But now, recently, as last year when I flew, the airline said, we're going to treat you with white gloves. We will take care of your chair. We will transfer you with dignity. Because I don't know if you can tell by this appearance, I'm not a small woman. And so to have someone who can properly transfer me from my chair into my plane seat is incredible. And to know that my chair will come back when I land in one piece is so reassuring.
It is and hugely important. Can
Mhm.
you share how you helped advocate for these changes and maybe even highlight the photo that folks can see on the screen here?
Well, that photo is an op-ed that I wrote about my experience and about the FAA reauthorization, just trying to get our legislators to pay attention to this. So I wrote for an op-ed. Dan and I blogged about it on our blog about the importance. We did action alerts, and honestly, I would talk to anyone about it who would listen because I want to fly. I want to fly with dignity and safety. And I don't feel that just because I have a chronic illness, I shouldn't be able to do that. And fortunately, the government and airlines agree. So it was just a joint effort.
Absolutely. And joint is the key there. It takes all of us working together. Bryant, how do you think this will help shape the future of air travel and what's next?
So I think it's already helped to shape it. So in October, the DOT issued a $50 million penalty against American Airlines for its treatment of passengers with disabilities, and it's the largest fine against an airline over disability rights in U.S. history. Now, additionally, there are some additional rules and regulations that are on the way. Several of the provisions that I previously mentioned are required by law to be issued no later than 1 year after the FAA reauthorization was passed. So by May, we'll be having by no later than May, there'll be new protections on the books aimed at making air travel more accessible for people with disabilities.
Thank you, Brian. Exciting things to look forward to for sure. And Jennifer, what are you most hopeful for, and kind of what are you thinking about as we begin to shape the future of air travel?
Well, if I'm to be perfectly greedy and honest, I can stay in my chair when Dan and I go for a trip. I can lock down in my van. I would love if airlines, all airplanes, doesn't matter the price of the airline, could develop a system so I could lock my chair into the airplane and I could stay seated in my chair and I wouldn't have to worry about it. And then somebody would have to transfer me. So again, I'm being greedy and hopeful, but I think that would be pretty amazing.
It would be. And thank you both for joining. You can chat further with Bryant and Jennifer in our breakouts a little bit later in the call. Next up, we're going to have Kendall Ferner, Senior Manager of Advocacy, and Tara Scheider, an MS activist from South Carolina, join us. So I'll just give them both a minute to join me up on screen here. Hey, Tara, Kendall. You just have to come off mute. There you go. You're all set. Kendall, we'll kick things off with you. You help lead our advocacy work in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the wins in your states?
Absolutely. Wins in advocacy can take on a lot of different faces, and it may not always be just as simple as a bill passing and becoming a law. So, as LB just mentioned, I cover South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And I'm going to start with a couple of things that we did in South Carolina. So, last year we worked on a bill titled the Compassionate Care Act, and this bill aimed to legalize cannabis for medicinal use in South Carolina, and it included MS as a qualifying condition for the use of medical cannabis. This bill has been brought forward into the South Carolina legislature quite a few times, but it's not seen a ton of success just because the content can be a little bit controversial. But we use our state action day there to talk with members of the legislature about the need for medical cannabis to treat certain symptoms of multiple sclerosis. We were able to help secure a meeting with a subcommittee, and we were actually able to submit 7 pieces of testimony delivered by 7 different MS activists, whether that be virtually, in person, and in written form. And this is just a really wonderful way to get activists involved in several different realms. So the subcommittee unfortunately did not pass this bill out, but we were able to amplify those voices of our activists and then set us up for an even stronger position in 2025. So in Georgia, we had a little bit of a similar situation, and it was about the topic of Medicaid expansion. This is the word on everyone's lips, it seems, in Georgia last year. And the society ended up playing a massive role in the rebranding of Medicaid expansion to closing the coverage gap. So it is the exact same topic, but basically a different terminology just to make it a little bit more palatable to some people. Our state action day in Georgia was focused on closing the coverage gap, and our activists made some serious impact in the Capitol on that day. And our activists were actually responsible for helping secure the first ever, I'm going to say that again, the first ever hearing on expanding Medicaid in Georgia. So that is a huge win for the Georgia activists. I could not be more proud of them. The bill unfortunately did not pass, but again, this hearing in itself is a major win. And this is opening the pathway for us to potentially expand Medicaid in Georgia next session. Additionally, while expansion didn't pass, we did have an alternative opportunity to support a bill that would create a study committee to evaluate how to expand coverage in Georgia. And this did pass, and it is an ongoing committee that's going to be submitting its findings later this year. But I just want to mention that the only reason we were able to even secure this historical hearing is because our activists used their voice and they said very loudly, this is what we need. And our lawmakers heard them and they listened. And then finally, in Florida, we were part of a team that helped pass a bill into law, which expanded coverage for biomarker testing. And this is part of a bill package that we worked on at our Florida State Action Day that ended up gaining a lot of traction. And they signed it into law earlier this year. So as you can see across a lot of different states that seem to be very similar, each one produced a very different kind of win. It's really important that we keep using our voices to get these wins in each respective state. And every step of this process each year is really leading us closer to the ultimate advocacy win, which is passing bills that help people in the MS community.
Thank you, Kendall. That's absolutely right. So as you can see, across the country, progress is going to look different, wins are going to look different, but nevertheless, the work is equally important and gets us towards our goals. Tara, you played an influential role in moving that compassionate care bill forward that Kendall just spoke about on really short notice. Can you talk to us about what that was like and how you participated?
Yes, so I was able to type my testimony and was able to have an email because unfortunately I was not able to attend to speak in person because I do live about an hour 40 and 30 minutes depending on traffic away from the capital in Columbia, and it was easy for me to be able just to send out and still allow my voice to be heard and share my experience, especially with using medicinal cannabis products like CBD, hemp oil with my pain with MS, because that has truly affected me in a lot of ways. As a lot of you probably don't know, I was diagnosed at 18. I'm 27 now, and I've experienced pain for all those years. I've tried a lot of pain medications, has not helped, and CBD was actually maybe able to rest, to get my body to like calm down, let the pain go down so I can finally get rest, get sleep. And we know sleep, of course, is important for our bodies to recover. And I just was grateful for the opportunity to share my voice, and we're still on the fight with it. Definitely not over. Our voices will still be heard with it.
That's absolutely right. And I love that you were able to still add your voice even though you couldn't be there in person. You had that option to write out your testimony and submit it in a different way. Kendall, in addition to testifying, what other roles did our activists in South Carolina play to help move this work forward and lay the groundwork for future years?
So I really try to get our activists involved in several different ways. So one of the things that I really like to do is have anyone who's part of my government relations advisory committee, or anyone really who's an activist and very interested, reaching out to lawmakers directly to talk with them about bills that we need their support on, or maybe sometimes even their opposition. And these activists worked tirelessly last session to do that by sending out, one pagers, their testimonies, and also calling them, emailing them, or even showing up in person. So, and as you said, we really do love to submit activist testimony to the hearings because the stories that come from the activists are so incredibly powerful, and it's what's making the most impact on the lawmakers. And like Tara said, she was not able to come in person, so she was able to write in testimony. So for those of you who maybe are a little bit public speaking adverse, there are still ways to share your story. You just have to take those avenues. Another thing that we did in my states was State Action Day. So it's a larger group of people all coming together to focus on a specific policy area, and all of the policy areas I mentioned earlier. And it's a really great way for them to connect with their lawmakers in person right away, face to face. But it's also a really great way to connect with other activists and become friends with a couple of other activists who live in your area who you might not already know. I also utilize action alerts during legislative session just because it's kind of a easy way to send a very quick message with a few presses of a button, but really, utilize the term of power in numbers. So we have a ton of people reaching out to their lawmakers on a specific topic at one time. It really does make an impact. Then finally, one thing is I always put the word out whenever I'm going up to the Capitol to see if anyone wants to just join me for that day. So we have a small group, like a mini state action day. And it's a great way for us to get one-on-one time, get to know each other a little bit better, but also to have some extra time with their elected officials as well.
Thank you, Kendall. And Tara, to wrap it up, how has being an MS activist helped empower you this year?
It has helped me learn about my voice and the importance of sharing my story and the things I've gone through, because there's probably somebody else who may not have the courage to speak up that went through the same thing or is going through the same thing. And being able to speak to my lawmakers from my district, from the House, from the Senate, and be able to meet so many other amazing MS activists has really helped me gain more courage to speak and let my voice remain heard. So yes,
And
I want, that's like the best experience I had, especially going to DC. It was a very jaw-dropping moment, but I enjoy it, and I encourage everyone to do the same.
absolutely. And we hope everyone on this call gets the experience to feel that same feeling in the future and get it more involved with our advocacy work. Thank you both. Next up, our final speaker before we head into our breakout rooms is Brett Meeks, the Vice President of Horizon Government Affairs. I'll give him a minute here to join us on screen. Hello, Brett. Um,
Well,
You've been an ally for the MS Society for several years now, and this year you were really instrumental in helping us feature an MS activist, Jeanette Ashlock from Virginia, as a key witness before the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Health Subcommittee. That's a mouthful. At an important hearing on telehealth. Can you tell us why you believe it's critical that the constituent experience, like Jeanette's, is shared in these high-level committee hearings alongside the issue experts like doctors and others that also sit on these hearings?
yeah, absolutely. And first, thanks to you, Laura, and everyone else at the Society for being a great partner with us. Great mission and great work. And I'm glad folks are getting to hear about some of the hard work you guys do today. Yeah, it's because patients and individuals and activists are these all the policies the fancy people in DC and the state houses are thinking about impact people in their everyday lives, right? And Jeanette was great. For those, some of you might know her. It's a big deal and sometimes a lot of pressure to come up to DC and share some very personal stories. She knocked it out of the park. She was just wonderful and a great example of someone making these issues real. A lot of times members of Congress or their staff are sort of wrestling with policy ideas for, we were talking about giving access to telehealth services. And everyone sort of agrees on that, but there are issues in DC because Medicare dollars are being spent and the cost, and do we allow these flexibilities for telehealth to continue, and should we require things like in-person visits? Well, they don't think about individual issues like access to transportation, right? That MS patients deal with on an everyday basis. So making those types of stories real for these policymakers and making them realize that these concepts that we're throwing into the law that will impact everybody actually impact some people in ways we did not intend. So the society and the activists you guys have are really instrumental in coloring in those lines and those details to make sure that well-intended folks in DC that are trying to do the right thing understand the complete picture of what they're doing, and it helps guide them to clean up problems they may have unintentionally created and avoid them going forward. So I think the society and your members are really instrumental in this and have done a great job so far. Jeanette's just one of those great examples of how it really worked out.
We agree. And you mentioned stories. What do you feel is the most important or are the most important components of advocate stories that they can share when they're meeting with elected officials?
Yeah, I think it is making it real. It is personalizing this. And so I worked in this US Senate for a long time. And sometimes you're 8 meetings a day, it's nonstop, people asking you for stuff. And it's very policy, you're jumping from issue to issue, but seeing a real person explain their real life experience, um, giving a real issue to them. In the telehealth example, there's a couple of things that really can help people connect the dots. So it is that hey, we're gonna we're going to have this in-person requirement, every 6 months for people to be able to have a telehealth visit, and having someone explain to them, well, when that trickles down to me as a person, I'm not going to be able to get to my specialist because they're 3 cities over. I can't drive, because I'm in a wheelchair. I have to get someone to drive me, and sort of explaining that there's not a one size fits all. So it's a combination really of that personalized story, taking these big policy ideas and making it real, explaining them what it means to you and your life, and why the decisions that policymakers make matter. And that they need to be nuanced enough to have flexibilities for things like that. But it's also, and this is hard, and this is where your partners in the society can help you, is taking that personalized story, making sure it connects with something that they're actually being worked on. It's like, here is this policy you're considering. You need to consider my personal experience, but also here's why. It's because if you don't allow this flexibility, I'm not going to be able to access care. So make a little tweak here. So having that sort of connection, it sounds harder than it is. It's pretty easy, but just making that personalized experiencing it, connecting it to that policymaker's day to day, like, hey, here's the action item. I need to change the words in here or allow flexibility for this real person to continue to receive care. So it's a bit of a twofer. And sorry if I didn't explain that really well, but you guys should watch Jeanette's testimony, because she had a lot of questions come her way and just handled it really well. It's a great example of how to do this the right way.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's available on the Society's website and YouTube channel. If you are curious, we can also drop a link in the chat here. Brett, last question for you. How do you think outcomes on Capitol Hill would be different without the perspective of MS activists like the ones here today willing to share their stories?
Yeah, I think it'd be a mess. A little bit of self-service because I work in government affairs, but you really don't want the government going forward blind, making decisions based on costs and what they perceive as the reality on the ground. What they need is to have perspective from real people out there living in the world. Not that they're not real people, but folks like activists from the society really paint the picture of what it means to live through these policies that impact their day-to-day lives, their ability to access care. And it's just such a foundational piece for people in DC, people in state houses, to be grounded in that reality. So they need to be reminded, again, their decisions matter. Without those voices, you end up having to go back to them to get them to fix problems they created. I don't think a lot of these problems are created with the intention of creating more red tape or hiccups or roadblocks and access to care. It's just what happens when bureaucracy funnels its way down. So you're going to have to remind these policymakers that this impacts real people. And without that, it's just, there's a complete disconnection. Because someone like me who used to do this stuff would just try to solve a problem. What's the easiest way I can get, Rand Paul and Elizabeth Warren, two really different members of the Senate that were on my committee. I need to get them to vote the same way. So I'm going to find the easiest way to draw that line. But without those details from people that have to be subject to these policies, without that lived and learned experience shared with me, I might not connect the dot to that person when I'm drawing that line. So you guys are an integral part of it.
That's very true. Well, thank you, Brett. And thank you to all of our staff, activists, and partners from across the country who've helped us throughout the year, and of course, who are speaking on today's panel. We see your comments in the chat. Keep them coming, and please take them and those wins and your questions to the breakout sessions that we'll be heading into in just a minute here. So keep that going. Soon we'll be heading into those breakout sessions so that each of you can further discuss your advocacy goals and get to know each other. But before we do that, I want to kind of notify everyone at this point that this is where we will be ending our recording here in just a minute. So the breakouts will not be recorded. And I want to remind everyone of some next steps to help us look into the new year in 2025 and what we can all do. If you have been on this call and you're new to advocacy and you hear us saying things like State Action Day or an action alert, and you might not know what those are, don't worry. We'll have a Q&A kind of at the end of here, or a resource that you can send your questions to. You can also connect with your advocacy staff partner if you know who that is. So first and foremost, if your member of Congress is one of the many new members of Congress joining the 120th Congress on January 3rd, get to know them. Read their biography, do a little bit of research, start to learn about what they might be interested in or where you might have some common ground. We'll be sending more information out in the future about how to do that, as well as information on who to find out who your elected officials are. Second, stay active. A lot of folks have mentioned action alerts and taking action online. A quick reminder that your elected officials, especially those that are in Congress, are still working. Their session has not ended for the year. They're in what we call the lame duck session, or the time between the elections and the new Congress taking place or coming into office. And there's a lot of important looming deadlines, including one coming up at the end of next week regarding the federal budget, which includes things like research funding. So when you see those come into your inbox, please personalize them and take action, take repeated action. It's important that those elected officials know that you're watching and that you're engaged, and to remind them that they have an important job that they need to complete, regardless of whether they will be in the next Congress or not. Most states will begin their sessions in or around January, so our state policy work will be picking back up in the new year. So stay tuned for more information on how you can get more involved at our work at the state level, including with our state action days if your state is one that hosts one. There are some important links being dropped in our chat, so feel free to bookmark those, including things like how to become an MS activist and get more involved. And lastly, if you've not done so already, please consider becoming a district activist leader. Many of our activists, or all of our activists who spoke today, are district activist leaders, and they take part in district meetings with their members of Congress throughout the year, as well as other society advocacy events and campaigns that we put together for them at the right time in the right place. If you've recently submitted an application, we're working on outreach to you, and you'll hear from us shortly. And if you have not and you're considering it, please do. The information is available on our website, and we'd love to get you more involved. So at this point, we're going to head into our breakouts for the final 12 to 15 minutes of this call. Everyone will be automatically moved into breakouts momentarily here, so there's nothing you have to do. Just sit tight, give the system a minute, and everyone will move. Feel free to join on camera and participate. And then at the end, everyone will be automatically brought into this group again to close things up. You'll have a society staff member leading some questions, but again, feel free to come up on camera and discuss. So off to breakouts we go.